Hey everybody, welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. So I'm very excited about this next review. First review I've ever released before a warband has ever hit the shelves. And of course, I'm talking about the Season 4 warband, Starblood Stalkers, the Lizard Men, who basically have come to Beastgrave in hopes to preemptively destroy the mountain before it becomes some kind of a demigod. And as I do in all these review videos, I'm going to be looking at this warband's fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, so their objective cards, and power cards, and I'm going to be rating this warband on a scale of S to D and comparing to all other warbands to see, generally speaking, how they fit into the fold. And as usual, I'm going to be starting by looking at this warband's fighter cards. So the first warband that doesn't have only 4 fighters, we have 6 units in this warband, who for the most part have an inspiring mechanic, which is seemingly difficult, in which they have to hold 3 or more objective tokens at the end of an activation. And I'll get more into the details of that a bit later. But anyway, let's just start with the leader. Kixie Taka, the Diviner, who has the skink keyword, who isn't the most aggressive or offensive, but is fairly versatile. A range 2 melee attack and a range 3 ranged attack. 2 hammers in both cases, 2 damage for the melee, 1 damage for the ranged. 4 movement, 2 dodge, 3 wounds. And the only thing that changes when this unit gets inspired is that his ranged attack, his Starbolt, becomes more accurate, moving up to 3 hammers. But especially interesting about this leader is that he has a special action in which he can pick a feature token, so basically an objective token, within 3 hexes, and then either flip that feature token, which essentially turns it into a lethal hex, or deal 1 damage to an enemy fighter who's within 1 hex of that token. Limited only to 1 time per round, but gives this warband the potential to flip 3 objective tokens in a game, which is huge. And this unit, like all the skinks, have that inspiring mechanic that I mentioned where they have to be holding 3 or more objective tokens at the end of an activation. Only exception to that rule is the Saurus Clacktrock, who inspires like Magor's Fiends, where he makes a successful attack action. And this unit's pretty dangerous. Typical attack is 2 hammers, range 1, 3 damage, doesn't change when inspired. But kind of like Rippus Snarlfang, has a reaction-based additional attack that can't be modified by any upgrades or anything or power cards, which, like Rippus Snarlfangs is not very accurate. It's 1 sword, 1 damage, uninspired, going to 2 swords, which is a bit better. But interestingly, does not require that an attack action specifically be made, but simply that this fighter is activated. So you can move him, and then he gets this attack for free. Or you put him on guard, and he gets this attack for free. So pretty cool special ability. Other characteristics, 3 move, going to 4 move when inspired. Gets 2 shield when inspired, making him very hard to hit, assuming there's no cleave, and then 4 wounds, so definitely a very solid unit. And the rest are the skinks. You have Ota Pottle, who has many keywords, skink, hunter, and quarry, and an odd ranged attack, which is a dart pipe, which only lands on crits, doing 1 damage uninspired, 2 damage inspired, and also has cleave and ensnare, which are just useless additions as far as making the attack is concerned, but I guess could apply to objective cards or something like that. And the dart pipe is interesting because it cannot be used to drive enemies back, but if it is successful, it causes the opponent to get a move token, which is very inhibiting. Although, clearly this attack is very unreliable, seeing as it only lands on crits, which is a 1 in 6 chance per die. 4 move, going to 5 move inspired, 2 dodge uninspired, which is good, going to 3 dodge inspired, which is amazing, and then 2 wounds, so pretty low wound characteristic. There's Huachi, who's a skink and a hunter, who has a pretty decent melee attack, 2 hammers, 2 damage, doesn't change when inspired. Javelin, getting better, going from 2 swords, 1 damage, to 3 swords and getting knockback when inspired. Only other thing that changes is that the 4 move changes to 5 move when inspired, and then 1 shield, 2 wound characteristic. And also has the skittish reaction, which is very nice, in which after an opponent's power step, you can push this fighter 1 hex away from an enemy fighter within 2 hexes, giving them a pretty reliable movement mechanic that doesn't really conflict with any reaction windows as far as I'm aware. And the other 2 skinks also have this skittish reaction. Talk, who's also a skink hunter, is a bit more range oriented than the other dude, having 2 swords, going to 3 swords when inspired on his melee attack, and then 2 swords, 1 damage, 2 swords, 1 damage for the ranged attack. 4 movement, going to 5 movement, 1 dodge, going to 2 dodge, so pretty evasive once inspired, but only 2 wounds. And Sepik also a bit more melee oriented, doing more damage when inspired, going to 3 swords, 2 damage when inspired. not as dodgy, but still good movement when inspired. And that does it for this warband. So looking at the pros and cons, these guys have some special combat abilities, cleave and ensnare for Otapotl, but basically useless in basic game terms. Knockback inspired for one of the fighters. Special abilities, though, are very nice. They have the Kixie Taka action, which is the whole flipping the feature token and causing damage to enemies near a feature token. Skittish, which is that push mechanic. The Dart Pipe, which allows you to put move tokens on fighters that get hit by the Dart Pipe. And the Powerful Jaws by the Saurus, which is great. They have range capabilities, obviously. Good movement, going up to 5 in a lot of cases. Versatile units. Melee ranged, good movement, tough, special abilities. The Hunter keyword, also have the Quarry keyword, which I forgot to mention here for Otapotl, and a large model number, which gives them many options. 6 units is a large model number. Cons being that they have generally low wounds, 4 units only having 2 wounds. Difficult inspire mechanic in theory. Covering 3 objective tokens is tricky, to say the least. And large model number, especially with the low wounds, means that there are many targets and they are kind of susceptible to being taken out of action. All right, next, let's move on to the objective cards. Starting with the Surge, there's Astromatrix Alignment. Score this immediately after you flip a feature token in enemy territory, worth 1. I'm going to give this an A. Only reason I'm not giving it an S is that your leader could be taken out of action. And if you draw this late, you wouldn't be able to score it. So it's definitely not a guarantee, although it's very likely. Formidable Focus. Score this immediately after an activation if 3 or more friendly fighters are in enemy territory, worth 1. So giving this a B, forces you to put your guys at risk. They're pretty low wound, definitely not a guaranteed score. There's Heralds of Annihilation. Score this immediately after an activation in which a friendly fighter made an attack action that took an enemy leader out of action, worth 1. So also tricky, killing an enemy leader, definitely not a guarantee, giving that a B. Instinctive Tactics. Score this immediately after resolving your warband's second or subsequent reaction in the same phase, worth 1. Given this an S. Skittish alone makes this very likely to get scored, not to mention Powerful Jaws. Then there's Sotex Hunters. Scores immediately after an activation in which a friendly fighter made a range 3 attack that took an enemy fighter out of action, worth 1. So pretty good. Only issue is that the range attacks only do 1 damage base. So, definitely possible to score this, but, between the possibility of missing the attack and then the low damage output of these range attacks, this is not a guarantee. And that does it for the Surge. Moving on to the score in the end phase cards, we have Balance the Cosmic Equation, which is a hybrid. Scores in an end phase if there are 2 or more enemy fighters out of action, or your warband holds more objectives than any other warband, worth 1. So giving this a B, might be worth an A. It's only worth 1 in an end phase, so not too amazing. And neither of the conditions of this hybrid card are guarantees either, but it is versatile. So, it's not a bad card. There's Children of Azir. Score this in an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter is inspired, and surviving friendly fighters have 3 or more upgrades, worth 2. So definitely are quite a few conditions here. I'm giving it an A because it's worth 2 glory in an end phase. With Skittish and with the other cards that these guys have, it isn't so difficult for them to get inspired. Obviously, it depends on if your Saurus lands his attack as well. And then having 3 or more upgrades, that's very likely to happen at some point. This could be worth a B. Next, there's Perfect Warrior. Duel. Score this in an end phase if there is a surviving friendly Clacktrock and each enemy leader is out of action, worth 1. So giving this a C. Killing a leader, like I said, not a guarantee. This is a score in the end phase, worth 1, and then you also have to make sure that your Saurus is still alive, so pretty conditional. There's Seeking the Heart, which is a hybrid. Score this in an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter is in enemy territory, or your warband holds each objective in enemy territory, worth 2. So given this a B, cool card, definitely encourages an aggressive play style, but with 6 units, many of which who are flimsy, getting them all in enemy territory and then holding objectives, or holding objectives, it's just a hard thing to do. There's the Great Plan. Score this in an end phase if you have scored 6 or more objective cards, and you have scored 1 or more Surge objective cards, 1 or more Dual objective cards, and 1 or more Hybrid objective cards, worth 3. This is pretty good. I feel like it's like Superior Tactician from Season 1, but just with some stipulations. The Dual, the Hybrid, the Surge, pretty capable of being pulled off. Probably worth an A. Also nice that it is not delegated to the 3rd end phase. It can be scored at the end of any end phase. Yeah, this could be worth an A. It's a hard call. Definitely very difficult to score if you draw this in the first round, though. Vengeance of the Heavens. Score this in an end phase if there are more enemy fighters out of action than there are surviving enemy fighters, worth 2. Also giving this a B, because it could be tricky to kill that many units. Will of the Slan. Score this in an end phase if your warband holds 1 or more objectives in 2 or more players' territories, worth 2. I'm giving this an S. Super nice, like swift capture, but a score in the end phase and worth 2. So that does it for the objectives, which typically promote flipping feature tokens, advancing into enemy territory, equipping upgrades, taking enemy fighters out of action in various ways, reacting, holding objective tokens, and scoring objective cards. Next, we have the power cards, starting with the Gambit. There is Burst from the Shadows. Choose up to 2 friendly hunters, push each chosen fighter up to 2 hexes. So given that an S, 4 hunters in this warband, pushing each of them 2 is great. Huanchi's Device. Pick 1, push 1 enemy fighter 1 hex, or pick an opponent. That player picks 3 fighters from their warband and pushes each of them 1 hex. If they have fewer than 3 surviving fighters, they push each of their surviving fighters 1 hex. So I'm giving this an A because of the distraction, that first effect. That second effect doesn't make a lot of sense to me. These guys have another card too that just seems to benefit enemies, which I find odd. Giving a warband the ability to push 3 of their fighters. Obviously, it's forced, so it could be inconvenient if they're holding objectives or something. But in any other situation, it just gives them a positional advantage. So I see the distraction aspect of this card getting used more. Next is Invisible Hunter. Remove a friendly Otapatl from the battlefield. That fighter is not out of action. This card persists until the end of the round. When this card no longer persists, place that fighter in an empty hex. In any empty hex not adjacent to any enemy fighter, you cannot play this card in round 3. So basically a teleport or a delayed teleport card for Otapatl, where it can be basically put anywhere so long as he's not adjacent to an enemy. So pretty good card. I'm giving it a B. Relegated to 1 unit. Isn't an immediate teleportation. So not great, but it's not bad either. Light of the Stars. As a reaction, play this after an opponent plays a Gambit. That Gambit deals no damage. So I'm giving it a B. Definitely nice if your opponent is playing a Gambit that does damage. But if they don't have any cards like that in their deck, then this is useless, besides the whole fact that you might get a reaction out of it and be able to score an objective card. Lords of Space and Time. Choose 1 friendly fighter that is not adjacent to any enemy fighters. Place that fighter in the same hex as an objective token in enemy territory, not adjacent to any enemy fighters. Then give that fighter 1 move token. So nice teleport card. Allows you to take an objective token so long as there's no enemies adjacent to it, which, might not be the case. But I'm giving it an A, because these guys need to hold objectives to inspire. Sotek's Venom, a poison. As a reaction, play this during a friendly fighter's attack action. After the deal damage step, give the target 1 move token. So nice potential transfixing stare with more range, but chance of failure if it's applied to the range attack. For the range, that is. I'm giving this an A. I think it's pretty good. There's T-Pox Mystery. Pick 1 opponent. That player picks 1 objective card from their hand and shuffles that objective card back into their objective deck. Then that player draws 1 objective card. So this card makes no sense to me. I'm giving it a D. I feel like this is purely beneficial for your opponent, who probably doesn't have 3 perfect cards in his hand and can then conveniently shuffle 1 out without even discarding it to draw a card that's probably more ideal. So yeah, D. I don't like this card at all. Now, cards that I do like are these asterisms. The Bulwark Celestial. Friendly fighters cannot be driven back. This effect persists until the end of the round or until you play another asterism card. I mean, this is S. If you don't want to be driven back, you play this and you will not be driven back for the entire round. That's amazing. There's the Great Drake, which is +1 dice to friendly fighters' range 1 attack actions, or to all friendly fighters' range 1 attack actions, which persists until the end of the round. So super increase in accuracy for all of your guys. Only issue, obviously, that you can't have 2 asterisms going at the same time, probably just because they're awesome. This is an S as well. And the Hunter's Speed. So same idea, but +1 move to all friendly fighters that lasts for the whole round. Great as well, giving this an S. And that does it for the Gambits, which typically promote pushing friendly and enemy fighters, teleporting friendly fighters, nullifying damage, impairing enemy movement, preventing drive back, improving accuracy, and improving movement. Which brings me to the upgrades, starting with Adaptive Camouflage. Restricted to Otapatl, -1 dice from attack actions that target this fighter if the attacker is not adjacent. So a benefit against ranged attacks. Giving it a B. It's nice, but it's restricted to Otapatl, only applies to ranged. Very circumstantial, might be worth a C. There's Astrolith Igniter. As a reaction during a friendly fighter's range 1 or range 2 attack action, before the attack roll, spend 1 glory. The attack action gains cleave until it has been resolved. So nice reactionary way to penetrate block defense. I'm giving this an A. Cloak of Feathers, +2 move, restricted to Kixitaka, of course. When this fighter makes a move action, it can move through occupied hexes and cannot be dealt damage by lethal hexes. It must end its move action in an empty hex. So turns him into a ghost, basically, with +2 move, although it still can't move through blocked hexes, but great card, giving this an S. Next, there's Heaven Blessed Weapon, +1 dice and knockback to this fighter's range 1 attack actions. Super badass, giving this an S. Herald of the Old Ones, restricted to the leader. If this fighter is within 3 hexes of a friendly skink, that is the target of an attack action, you can re-roll 1 defense dice in that skink's defense roll. So very nice if you're cluster attacking, giving this an A. Improves your defense, which is always nice. Selfless Sacrifice, as a reaction during an attack action that targets this fighter. After the deal damage step, if this fighter will be taken out of action, this fighter makes an attack action. So a sort of last stand attack. Pretty decent, restricted to skinks. I'm going to give it an A. Spawning Bond, restricted to skinks as well. As a reaction, after another friendly skink is pushed from a hex within 3 hexes, push this fighter 1 hex. Giving this an S. Super nice, especially with their skitter ability. There's Supreme Predator, restricted to Clacktrock. This fighter is a hunter. This fighter cannot be a quarry. Each enemy fighter is a quarry. You can reroll 1 dice in this fighter's attack rolls if the target is a quarry. So a reroll makes everybody a quarry. Basically turns this guy into Hrothgorn, giving this an S. Next, there's Unfeeling Resilience, which is a -1 wound, so damage reduction, giving this an A. And finally, Unhesitating, +1 move and +2 move instead if it happens to be a skink that you equip this on, giving this an S. Great move bonuses. So lots of S's for the upgrades, super nice, and they promote impairing enemy ranged attacks, increasing accuracy, improving defense, improving movement, an out-of-turn attack, pushing friendly fighters, and manipulating the hunter-quarry mechanic. And this does it. So overview, looking at the objectives, the gambits, the upgrades. We can see that the objectives are not exceptional. There are 2 S-ranked cards, 2 A-ranked cards. Most of them are pretty mediocre, being B tier, so not the greatest objective cards, but they're also not bad. Gambits are very good. Upgrades are very, very good. Tons of these cards are auto-includes in any Starblood Stalkers deck. And that does it. So time to rate this warband. But before I do that, I wanted to, I guess, errata my existing tier list. So when I built this tier list, it was made without really taking into account the whole primacy token mechanic that was introduced. Initially, I wasn't sure if primacy was going to be a permanent thing, thinking that it might be cycled out when season 4 finished and moved into season 5. But seeing as the newest Orc warband has the primacy mechanic built into its faction-specific cards, I think it's safe to say that primacy is sticking around. So because of that, I think that actually affects the tier list, where warbands that hit harder should be ranked higher on this list, and warbands with many low wound units should be put lower on this list. So with that in mind, these are the modifications that I'm making to my existing tier list, and it goes as follows. So starting at the top, I'm moving Grimwatch from 1st place to 3rd place. Still S tier, still have great cards, still have great mechanics. But considering that they have many units that aren't so difficult to take out of action, it really causes them to sacrifice the primacy token. I didn't move Thorns of the Briar Queen, even though they do have kind of a similar issue, mostly because they are more defensive. But I did put Lady Harrows to the front, to the top of this list, because they have many high damaging units. And then, with all their other great cards, great mechanics, I just feel that they deserve to be 1st place at this point. In the A tier, I've moved Morgox up to 1st place. Moved them up 3 rankings because these guys are just the bosses of primacy. Huge damage. Ardskull can one-shot Mollog in the right circumstances. Super tough, so no one's getting primacy against them. And they're just quite versatile since there are primacy cards available, primacy objective cards that these guys can benefit from. It really just increases their versatility, and then they get the primacy benefits as well, which is the spent glory point. So I'm putting them to the top of the A tier. I'm moving Hrothgorn up as well for similar reasons, because Hrothgorn is also great at getting that primacy token, forcing me to move Thundrix Profiteers back 1. And further on the right, I'm moving Mollog up 3. He was behind Zarbag's Gitz. I think now with the primacy mechanic in play, Mollog is better in general across all meta because that increase in versatility and because of the extra glory he can get from the primacy token. I have moved 2 warbands out of the A tier. So Morgwaits and Grashrax, because Primacy really works against them. They have low wound units, so they get taken out of action. Their enemy gets Primacy. I have a hard time justifying keeping them in A. I'm keeping them at the top of the B tier because they still do have very good objective cards, mostly end power cards. I moved Wormspat up 2 ahead of Sepulchral Guard and Spikeclaw's Swarm because they are more susceptible to Primacy, and Wormspat does have high damage hitters, making them good at getting the Primacy token. And similarly, moving Magors up above Garrix and Iltharis because they're tough and they hit hard, and once again, Primacy works to their advantage. So this is my new tier list. Now that we know that the Primacy rules are here to stay. So let's get back to the review of the Starblood Stalkers. Just to summarize, these guys have a tricky Inspire mechanic that conflicts with their leader's special action, which is to flip feature tokens, but they need to hold on to 3 of them. So a bit of a conflict there. However, these guys do have many push card options, and they have Skittish to facilitate achieving this, so it really isn't super difficult to achieve their Inspire mechanic. They do have many low wound units, however, which makes them vulnerable against Primacy, as I just mentioned, but they do have good defensive options, great defensive options, actually. They also have many special abilities which enable their effective movement, their objective destruction, their movement inhibition of enemies, and their damage output with that reactionary attack by the Saurus. And finally, these guys have great power cards, maybe some of the best power cards in the game. Their asterisms provide amazing bonuses, and upgrade cards are flexible and make Clacktrock, their Saurus, a beast. So with all this in mind, I'm grading this warband as an A, and this is where I place them in the overall scheme of things. Right at the end, but before Zarbag's Gits. I feel like their overall card repertoire gives them an advantage over Zarbag's Gits. They also have the Skittish ability, which is not super dissimilar from the Scurry ability that Zarbag's Gits have. They're more defensive. I do put them behind the Dread Pageant and Miari's Purifiers, though, because I do feel that those 2 warbands are superior, are tougher, and are less susceptible to being killed and castrated and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that does it for my review. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. And that basically does it for me, so I hope you all have a nice day.